2 weeks of moves in free agency means that most of the major player movement is complete. Are the Cincinnati Bengals better in 2024? Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. Today, we get into whether or not the Bengals are improved in 2024 after the major moves in free agency. If you're new to the podcast, we're on YouTube. We're everywhere you get your podcast. So if you prefer video, you prefer to see us, sometimes look at the camera while we talk at you. Check it out on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the thumbs up on YouTube, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're delivered to your devices when we upload our new episodes every day, and you'll be up to date on all things Bengals and have all the latest analysis and news you need to be the smartest person in your office and the smartest person when you make us your first listen on your way to work and listen to us every day. Well, we appreciate all of you who do those things. Anyway, and today, James, we answer the question. There will still be some moves between now and training camp, and obviously the NFL draft is coming, but after free agency every year, the balance of veterans moving away from the team and coming to join the Cincinnati Bengals is mostly complete. Are the Cincinnati Bengals better so far in 2024 than they were in 2023?
Yes. The answer is yes. And for a variety of reasons. Now, are they worse in some areas? Absolutely. There's no doubt that today their cornerback room is worse than it was 3 weeks ago when Chidobe Awuzie was technically still on the roster. There's no doubt that from a nose tackle standpoint, they are worse, but their interior pass rush is better. The back end of their secondary is better. The offense, I think, fits better. They have more explosive pieces, and they have a much better pass blocking right tackle. Doesn't mean there aren't flaws. It doesn't mean that there aren't things that we'll obviously discuss on the pluses and the minuses. But to me, the Bengals are an improved team. I like that they clearly had their targets in free agency, Jake, and they were bullish on them and they targeted them and they went and they got them. They didn't wait on tight end like they did last year. You know how it's kind of like a waiting game at tight end. What did they do? Nah, they got Drew Sample done, and then they went and they got the guy they wanted outside the organization and Mike Gesicki, and then they rounded out with Tanner Hudson. They were very direct about going after Geno Stone. And what was probably the most predicted free agent target for the Bengals, they went and they got him. And they said, hey, we're going to get this center fielder that we think is going to make us better and take away the explosives. That's great. And then they still were able to bolster the interior of their pass rush. Like, I think when you look at it, there are going to be some negatives. But when I look at this team now, does Zach Moss help them? I think he does, especially with the way they want to play. Does Mike Gesicki give them a little juice that they would have missed and could realistically miss without Tyler Boyd? I think he does. Obviously, you bring back Drew Sample and Tanner Hudson, Trenton Irwin, the key veterans that you do value. And so you take a step back in a few areas that we can discuss. But overall, do I think the Bengals are better? To answer your question, I do think they're better. I don't think I'm drinking the orange and black Kool-Aid either, because there's still flaws. There's still things they need to do. And to your point about there's still moves to be made, there better be moves to be made. They still need to add a few veterans, whether it's now or after the draft. I think they will add one or two more veterans. Remember last year with Sidney, Sidney Jones, and then they brought in the edge that didn't even make it onto the team from OU. But regardless, Basham, yeah. I think you could see that type of level of signing still, maybe more than that, like we discussed on yesterday's show, if you're wondering. But yes, they are better.
It's interesting when you go move by move, position by position. There aren't one-to-one replacements everywhere. But they lose DJ Reader at nose tackle. They signed Sheldon Rankins. DJ Reader is a better player than Sheldon Rankins when both guys are 100%, but Sheldon Rankins isn't a slouch. He brings some things that DJ Reader doesn't bring in terms of explosiveness, in terms of ability to get after the passer and be more disruptive. Not that DJ couldn't get after the passer, don't get me wrong. I've often sung the praises of DJ Reader, pass rusher and pocket collapser on this podcast, because he isn't just a run stuffing nose tackle. But Sheldon Rankins does it in a little bit of a different way. He's more of a penetrator, more of a chaos causer. And so, while I think the quality of player is a half step downgrade, if you're going from a guy that's a all pro level player when he's on his game, you're going to a guy who's a good player in Sheldon Rankins, who hasn't ever been able to put it quite all together to be a Pro Bowl level player, but does a lot of really good things and can help your defense. There's a little bit of a step down there, but it's
I
different.
agree. I agree there's a step down. I do want to point out this too, because I could totally see someone just looking up DJ Reader on Pro Football Reference and being like, hey, he isn't a Pro Bowler. He's not an All-Pro. And yet you talk to anyone, whether it's on the Bengals or across the league, and they mention DJ Reader and his impact. So he did have that type of impact, even though when he was healthy for the Bengals, even though he might not have gotten the awards, the notoriety that comes with it. So that's why you're saying what you're saying. I'm just
playing at that level, not necessarily reaching those accolades individually. And I don't think Sheldon Rankins has quite played at that level for an entire season. And not to take anything away from him. I think he's a good player, but DJ Reader, I think, was a special player for this team. And the injuries really robbed you of some of that for the Cincinnati Bengals. And, you hope he gets healthy and continues to be great in Detroit, because I root for DJ Reader individually. Anybody who watched our episode after he officially signed with Detroit knows how I feel about him, knows how we feel about him as a great player, great human being. But Sheldon Rankins seems like he's going to be able to fill some of that leadership void as well. He has a big personality and has been well liked in previous locker rooms. So from that perspective, replacing 198 from Houston with another 98 from Houston, you do replace some of the leadership attributes you lose with DJ Reader. You do replace some of that veteran presence in your locker room, that realness, the down to earth and football grinder mentality that Sheldon Rankins brings. It's just a little bit of a different player. Although if you're comparing directly Reader to Rankins, some of the biggest, most significant starter level changes for this team, I do think it's like they got a little bit worse there, but they also got different there. And that opens the door for them to change things further with their defensive interior through the draft, through remaining interior defensive line moves that they could make with some of the stragglers in free agency between now and training camp.
And I think this is where the Bengals could make their hay a bit more. They'll look at it and they'll probably see some value out there. And I remember last year, and neither guy really had an impact, but you add Basham, you add Irv Smith Jr., you add Sidney Jones, and it was like, okay, it opens things up a bit. Tanner Hudson ended up being the one that stabilized the tight end room, but adding veterans that are slightly ahead of those guys, I think would go a long way, especially at corner. And I think it's fair to expect that. But to your point, there isn't one for ones across the board. The one for ones I think that they did add outside of Reader Rankins are clear upgrades for what the Bengals want to do, to me. And I think we could dive into that a little bit more, because there are plenty of one for ones that or just free agent swaps that we haven't discussed yet, even though the Rankins Reader one is a big one and has been a main topic.
Yeah, we'll continue to work through those one-to-one comparisons, who they lost, who they got, do those comparisons directly, and then we'll get into some overall thoughts on grades. In a free agency period where we said this on Monday, we started the week with kind of a where are they at so far? They signed Trent Brown since then. We finished the week through 2 weeks of free agency where you can really say most of the major moves have been completed. And where are they now? And you've had time to consider the value and what other teams have done around the league and what you could accomplish this free agency. And we'll weigh in with some grades to finish up the show as well. But we'll continue those one-to-one replacements, and a very large one, perhaps, coming up next.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our times wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? Maybe it's watching college basketball all day on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday because the tournament is on. Maybe it's listening to Locked On Bengals. Heck, maybe you're Jake Lisco. It's napping. Only some people will get that, even though you weren't napping. Regardless, BetterHelp could help you maximize your time. Find extra time to do what you want to do so you can prioritize it and make more time for it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to the busiest of schedules. And right now you can get 10% off your first month. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
The one-to-one change that I think is next on the list to talk about is right tackle. Jonah Williams departs to Arizona.
Whoa. All right.
Trent Brown arrives in Cincinnati. We've been talking about Trent Brown all week, but if you're going down the list of impactful one-for-one player leaves, player arrives, I think that's the next one. That's the most valuable position that the Bengals replaced in terms of what they like to do. And in terms of a scheme fit, we've talked about all week, Trent Brown comes from a place where he has been left on islands in pass protection for the last 2-3 years. The Bengals will leave him on an island in pass protection. That's going to be his job. And he, for the most part, is a better pass protector than they had in Jonah Williams. If Trent Brown is healthy, this might be a significant upgrade for the Bengals at right tackle and in pass protection.
Yeah, it's so much better suited for what they want. I think, and I've said it multiple times this week, I think Jonah in the NFC West works. I think when you have to deal with Myles Garrett and TJ Watt, and you're going to drop back like the Bengals do, it's tough. And that's why there are mixed feelings on Jonah. I think Trent Brown is built for this. And so when you score these two players, I think it's closer than some would say. Like, even if you look at the PFF numbers, I think Jonah and Trent, they're closer player-wise overall. But I do think Trent is just such a better fit for what the Bengals are trying to do. And that doesn't mean they aren't going to run it. Of course, they're going to run it. And we'll get to that in a bit of why they're more suited to do that. But they're a throwing team. Game on the line. They want the ball in Joe Burrow's hands. They want to be able to keep him upright. Going into Baltimore after losing to Houston and trying to bounce back and stay alive in the division race, they're going to want to throw the ball around. And because that's how they're at their best. Regardless of who is blocking, very rarely are you going to want to say, all right, let's take the ball out of Joe Burrow's hands because he gives you the best chance to win. Well, now you have a clear upgrade to me, like you said, in pass blocking. You have a guy who is his own island. We've talked about him being on an island all week, and I get it because it's the one-on-one situations. He's his own island. He is that big. The Bengals sent out the release, 6'8", 380. That is 6'8". That's do we weigh 380 together?
No.
How much you weigh?
Not enough to get us to 380.
No, because I'm at like 180. So yeah, you don't weigh 200.
No, I don't weigh 200 pounds.
I might be at 185 if I throw a few back, but I'm still, the point is I'm not at 200, and I don't think you're at 180. So Trent Brown is a perfect fit there. Now, are there questions? Health? Age? Absolutely. And that's why it doesn't really impact the draft, and they still need to add to that room, whether it's the interior, whether it's offensive tackle, hopefully a guy who could do both. That would be great, right? The flexibility would be nice. But adding Trent Brown, he was the ideal 1-year contract in my mind coming into free agency. Wasn't sure if they'd be interested. Wasn't sure if Mekhi Becton would get that because of the upside that comes with Mekhi, and I do think there's some upside there. But for 2024, I'm not sure there was a better option at right tackle than Trent Brown. In that, I think that includes Tyron Smith, because Tyron Smith didn't play a ton of right tackle. Trent Brown embraces it. It's like, yeah, I play both sides. I'm willing to play wherever. I love that because it's a rare trait, and he seems so comfortable with it. Mid-game, he might be able to move over if you need him to. And that's really, really valuable as well. We still haven't seen the contract numbers too. Mm-hmm. Feels like they got a steal, Jake. Yeah, it really does, especially when Jonah's making $15 million per.
The fact that we haven't seen the contract numbers, and usually when those come out early, that's coming from the agent, and the agent is celebrating something they've accomplished, and that's why we're hearing those contract numbers early most of the time. There's a decent chance the Bengals got a good deal here. There's a decent chance that that good deal means that the Bengals have some money left to play with in free agency as well. But the fact that it is a 1-year deal and the way they structured their deals this offseason, which is something that will weigh into my overall thoughts and grading in a little bit, does suggest that they're not necessarily going to be the most aggressive in terms of maximizing their cash spend this year. The 1-year deal does also remove some of that cap flexibility that we talk about a lot when we're trying to prognosticate and predict what the Bengals will do. But like I said, from Jonah Williams to Trent Brown, I think you got better in pass protection. You got less athletic. You got less athletic on an offensive line that was already one of the least athletic in the NFL. But you got a guy that should improve your pass protection. You got a guy that improves your power. When he gets a hold of you, he will move you. If you're anybody in the NFL, because he's one of the biggest men and strongest men in the NFL. And so there are certainly a lot of things to like with Trent Brown. The questions are, can he stay healthy? Well, the question is, can he stay healthy? And also interesting, the two guys we talked about are the two guys that we kind of weren't sure the Bengals would be interested in because of age considerations. And they went outside
Are
of
we
their
sure they
comfort
got less
zone on.
athletic?
Yes. What do you mean?
I'm not. Because like Jonah tested pretty poor. He ran an okay 40. But like
Jonah was at least in like an average athlete.
at 6'4", 302 though. Like I
Yeah,
bet you if you
but
did like the
that's
size
still
adjusted
athleticism.
at
Are you looking
6'8",
at Trent Brown's
355.
RAS?
Yeah. Yep.
I don't have it in front of me.
So it's a 3.7. Trent is.
Mhm.
Jonah is a 5, under a 6, 5.49. So I don't want to go too far because it's almost like the nose tackle debate to a degree, where it's like, how great would a guy like Trent Brown have to test anyways? I don't know. I think he moves fine for his size, but there is that
Trent Brown,
qualifier.
am I seeing right that Trent Brown has 31-inch arms? Is that real? Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yep.
How are you 6'8", you have 31-inch arms? That's like the opposite of this year's draft class at tackle. That's some weird proportions right there. But then I was looking at the bench number because he only benched 20 reps at 355, which
Only.
well,
That is
obviously
low.
for
No, I
most
agree.
people that's really good. But for a 355-pound man at the combine, that's below average for a tackle. And so I was looking at arm length. 'cause a lot
Orlando
of
Brown
times,
Jr. was at 14
but he
reps.
has longer arms, doesn't he? Like if you
I'm
get
sure.
those longer arms, you do have to think about that a little bit. But anyway, I do think they got less athletic in terms of raw athleticism. I think Jonah was like an adequate athlete, and Trent Brown just doesn't move as well. But for all of that, they did get better in a lot of ways that are important to the way they want to play football, like we've talked about. So I do think they got better at right tackle as much as they might have gotten a little bit worse with the DJ Reader Sheldon Rankins swap.
Yeah, I think I just think it's close. It's not like Jonah's this explosive guy.
No,
Is
but they
all.
didn't have that. So
No doubt. And so that's why fit wise, it's like, oh yeah, well, we can deal with this. We can take a slight step back if you want to call it that. But you have the power, you have the pass protection, you have the 31-inch arms does not line up. That's in my head. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to talk to Trent when I see him and be like, hey man,
I'm
let's
bewildered. I'm bamboozled.
31. I mean, yeah. So Jonah, just to give people an idea, is at 33.6 inch arms. And so hand size 2 for Trent Brown. I don't know. Maybe this is wrong.
There's some proportion stuff there that looks weird.
31-inch arms and 8.3. I wonder if it's just wrong. That really doesn't make sense. Anyways, let's continue. We have to get the Zach Moss. We have to get the Mike Gesicki. We have to get to, I'm sure there's, the safety room. We haven't even talked about Geno Stone and Von Bell. We will do all of that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, and I got to mention it now, Jake, because if you're filling out your brackets and you want to go game to game, well, there's one team that I'm rooting for. One team that I'm rooting for. Jake, do you know who it is?
No.
UConn Huskies. That's right. The UConn Huskies. Hopefully they can get it done. Why do you think so? Why do you think that? Well, it's simple. Dan Hurley, big Bengals fan, hopefully Locked On Bengals listener. He
Shout
said
out
who
Dan.
day at the end. Yeah, he said who day at the end of his news conference in Cincinnati after UConn beat Xavier, I believe it was. It had to be Xavier because they didn't play UC. Anyways, we are, at least I am rooting for you. And if you want to get in on the action with FanDuel, you can right now, whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed like UConn. FanDuel offering $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and so much more. I love FanDuel. You're going to love it. It's quick. It's easy to use. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until hopefully Dan Hurley is cutting down the nets.
Running back, safeties, tight ends. We got a 1-to-1 comparison that I think is pretty quick at tight end. Maybe we start there. Mike Gesicki is an upgrade compared to Irv Smith, I think, period.
What?
And Tanner Hudson, they know what he is now, so he doesn't have to spend like 7 weeks on the practice squad before they
It was one of the worst
figure
moves
out.
of the year.
Man, that
One of
was
the worst
bad.
moves of the year. Cutting.
And the Drew Sample contract is something I won't belabor, but is very weird as a front-loaded cap hit, but no dead cap hits if the Bengals do not work out with Drew Sample after this year. So relatively low-risk move for the future. Tight end room, floor is pretty high. The floor should be higher than it was than it was last year with Mike Gesicki in the building. The other guys are familiar with. They know their roles at this point. There's no feeling out period with those guys. They have a chance to go add in the draft here as well. I think they're better enough at tight end with an explosive athlete in Mike Gesicki that one's pretty cut and dry.
No doubt. No doubt. I love it. I wanted him last year. He was certainly someone that we talked about a lot. Had a crappy year in New England. Also enjoys cheese conies. That was a cool video by the Bengals. I'm in on Mike Gesicki. I think we'll have plenty of time to discuss this. I'll just make the prediction now. 60 catches for Mike Gesicki. 60.
Would that be
Big
the
part of
most
the
for
offense.
any Joe
Yep.
Burrow tight end?
No doubt. No Tyler Boyd. Gonna
Yeah,
fill the void from Boyd.
Unless they draft a second-round receiver that steps into that role right away, that's a reasonable thought because Gesicki is going to take some of those slot snaps for sure.
Yeah, and by the way, I think they will take a receiver pretty early, and that guy will mix in, and so will Andre Yosavash, and so will Charlie Jones, and an injury or two will happen. We've seen it from both receivers, Higgins and Chase. So I think Gesicki will have a pretty big role in this offense. I think he's an upgrade, and man, what a value! Was it $2.5 million? I think $2.5 million is his base. Sign me up all day long. I think Mike Gesicki has a good year. 1-to-1, Zach Moss, Joe Mixon. I think cheaper, younger, a lot less wear and tear in the fit. And the fit part is so huge here. You get someone that they're going to feel comfortable in pass protection day one. Someone that they think is more explosive, someone that they think is better at breaking tackles. The stats obviously back that up. I think it makes a ton of sense. It's a really good fit. Now, do you lose a little bit in the passing game? Absolutely. One of the things that made Joe Mixon so special as a prospect coming out of Oklahoma and still, and why Houston's excited to get him, I think, is because of his hands out of the backfield and his ability to run routes at his size, all of those things. At the same time, I do think, one, the Bengals could find that in this draft class if they want. Two, Moss and Chase Brown are capable enough to where they're not going to lose much there for what they do at running back. It's not like they're splitting Mixon out a ton and running routes with him, sending him on routes and relying on that. It's a lot of dump offs and check downs that these running backs can do as well.
That's Chris Evans' job to line up at wide receiver, and that be his primary alignment for the season.
Still around.
But yeah, he is still around. Joe Mixon was a better receiver than Zach Moss, no doubt. But Zach Moss, as a runner, relatively similar and offers better elusiveness, which is something they were looking for. You're going to get potentially more ability. He's shown the ability on tape to, with good contact balance, good ability to make guys miss, turn those 7-yard runs into 15-yard runs, turn those 4-yard runs into 7-yard runs. And not that Mixon couldn't do this. He had that cutback ability. He had that, when he was going well, explosion to make guys' angles wrong and get those extra yards. But He's never been a huge contact balance guy. He's never been a guy who's going to keep his feet. If you heard Dan Pitcher talking about Zach Moss's film on the Growler with Paul Daner, you heard him talk about guys that run with a forward lean with good pad level versus Zach Moss playing with a good pad level without getting way out in front of his feet. And those guys that run with the forward lean, and Joe Mixon did this a little bit, would tend to trip up and fall. And they would fall for the extra 3 yards, but they wouldn't keep their feet and be able to drag guys. And you see a little bit more of that with Zach Moss on tape. I think similar players in terms of like overall ability, but the better fit component there and opening up the Bengals to use Chase Brown more in the receiving game. Where are they going to replace that Joe Mixon receiving production? Could be Chase Brown, right? And his explosive speed, the fastest running back in the NFL in GPS tracked speed in 2023. Get him the ball in open space and let him run. Get him going downhill. Let him outrun guys. And this is a draft class that offers a couple of very explosive backs as well. If the Bengals are so inclined, Jalen Wright from Tennessee and Trey Benson from Florida State, both very, very fast and offer some of that ability if the Bengals do choose to go day 2 running back. So the running back room in general should be opened up, even if there's not a 1-to-1 clear upgrade from Joe Mixon to Zach Moss.
Do you hear that? That's Audric Estime rumbling at Paycor Stadium after being picked in the 4th round, Jake. Oh my God. No, I know you like Jalen Wright. Man, I can't wait to dive into the draft. We are so close to doing that. Anyways. Yeah, I like it. I think Zach Moss, it's kind of like Geno Stone, and we can use it to transition. From a running back standpoint, when you looked at everybody that was available, he was one of the higher end options of.
I mentioned his name so many times.
Yeah, he fits. Yeah. And yet it's not Saquon, Derrick Henry, like all of these other guys. Like when I say higher end, it's like higher end, but also fits exactly what you're looking for from a budget standpoint and from a position money allocation standpoint, all of the above. And so I think that they got it right there. Hard to argue with them adding a guy like Geno Stone, 7 interceptions last year, 2 years, $14 million, has $1 million in incentives reportedly that he can hit as well. Look, they clearly felt uneasy about the back end. I'm probably the biggest Dax Hill believer on the planet outside of maybe some of his relatives, maybe some of them. At the same time, that's how they felt. And the last thing you want to do is not address what you feel are clear needs, weaknesses, whatever. And so I think it makes sense that they're able to add Geno Stone, make him a priority. Better there, certainly, on the back end. And then you bring back Von Bell, instant stability, instant veteran leadership, all of the above. Mm-hmm. It's hard not to like both of these additions because you didn't spend much money and you're getting great value with Bell.
Yeah, the floor of your safety room is elevated, for sure, with Geno Stone, Von Bell. And throw Jordan Battle in the mix. I don't know that Dax Hill is still a safety. We'll see. Maybe that final depth chart of training camp will give us some clarity. I don't know, but if Tyson Anderson comes back, Tyson Anderson could be your 4th safety. Dax Hill's going to play some safety. Still trying to figure out what this means for Dax Hill.
I still like Tyson Anderson. It's crazy, dude.
But
you know who Tyson reminds me of?
Go ahead.
Geno Stone.
Interesting.
Late round
Much
picks.
more athletic, isn't he?
Yeah, but like he is way more athletic. But ball skills,
like get the opportunity and see.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. I see what you're saying. I think that the safety moves increase the floor, like I said, of the defensive backfield, but they do potentially chop off a little bit of the ceiling if Dax Hill was going to put it together. But clearly, this coaching staff, maybe not clearly, maybe there's still a chance that it's Dax Hill and Geno Stone on opening day. But the messaging that we're seeming to get from this Bengals team is that Dax Hill is not necessarily their first choice at safety. And I think
that's what I would do.
And actions tell us that too.
I think their best, like their highest ceiling safety room is those two.
Probably.
Highest ceiling. But I don't know. So hopefully he responds the right way. But regardless, to your point, they're better at safety than they were 2 weeks ago. I don't really know how you could debate it. You can't.
Yeah. The places where they don't have new player replacements, Chidobe Awuzie, you mentioned, departs for Tennessee. Wish him the best of luck in finding a quality few years on the football field and a quality chess partner in the Tennessee locker room. And Tyler Boyd's still unsigned. There's no new slot receiver on the Cincinnati Bengals. So those are 2 departures that have not, or anticipated departures in the case of Tyler Boyd. that have not been filled. Maybe that happens in the draft. Maybe there is that veteran cornerback signing that we've seen them make the last few years. We expect, I think, both of us for them to use draft capital at wide receiver. So overall, I see a team that has elevated their floor a little bit and opened their boundaries at running back. So the floor across the board, I think, is a little bit higher, except on the defensive interior, where I think there's no way to get around losing DJ Reader is a big hit. But the floor at safety should be higher. The floor at tight end should be higher. The floor at running back and at right tackle, as long as Trent Brown is healthy, should be higher. But like I said on Monday, James, this wasn't a free agency where you could find significant amounts of core pieces to supplement your draft failures or places where your draft picks have left something to be desired. And they've done some of that in terms of filling holes for a short-term run here for the next year or two, depending on the contract. But I don't think there's a Trey Hendrickson or a DJ Reader or a Chidobe Awuzie in this free agent group. And so that would have been hard to do this year because of the kinds of guys that were available. But just like on Monday, I'm at around a B plus, because I don't dislike any of their individual moves. They just didn't hit any of the big franchise changing moves that really made some of their previous draft classes or free agency classes in retrospect an A or A plus. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. I think they did so much better in free agency this year than last year.
Oh, no doubt about that, for sure.
In like looking back at last year, I'm so glad that they were direct, trusted their instincts. They weren't kind of waiting around seeing if they could keep one of their safeties or keep one of their, we'll keep Jermaine Pratt no, they were aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And that aggressiveness reminds me of 2021. To your point, you're not seeing 3 and 4 year deals. You're seeing shorter deals. Part of it's because of the age of some of these players. Part of it is Geno Stone probably wants to test the market again in a few years. And the Bengals, they probably want to see him play really at a really high level again next year. So they don't have to commit to him super, super long term. And they're able to get a deal done without doing that. So I think it lines up and what it means. And I'll give like a 90 out of 100, like a B plus. If I had to give a grade today, part of that is
A minus in modern grading.
Yeah, I'm not a professor today these days, man. 88, because I'm at a high B plus. So maybe was it an 89 to like 85?
88, 89 in my world was a B plus. Yeah,
B plus. Okay, so 89. We'll give it an 89. Drew sample grade here, an 89, and that is assuming that they add a corner that they feel comfortable starting at times this year. Maybe not week 1, but if there's an injury, they still have to do that. Without that, let's say they do nothing and they just go into the draft with their 10 picks. I would have it at like an 85, which is still good. It's still a B because I like all of their moves. There isn't one player, to your point, that I would disagree with for what they paid to get him. At the same time, man, it would have been nice to have Rankins and Reader. Man, it would have been nice to add another lineman. Man, it would have been nice to add. So they could easily get it to like a 93, I bet, if they really wanted to, or could have if they had added Reader and then added another lineman and then still add a corner. But I assume that they'll add a corner, add maybe another piece here or there, and they'll be right at that 80, 89, high B plus for the Bengals. Really like what they've done.
Yeah, and the important point there is the players they've added for the money they've added. There's no albatross contract here. There's no long-term commitment that's going to come bite them. There's no guaranteed money where they're going to take massive dead hits in the future. That is one place where their approach does help them. So the contracts, I think they got good value. They didn't tie themselves up for the future too much. And I think that's part of it too. They didn't necessarily stretch their dollars and stretch their cap hit or their cap allocations this year either, which is the negative side of this. But the other side is that they didn't lock themselves in, and they seem to have gotten pretty good value across the board. So that's where we're at. After 2 weeks of free agency, a lot of one-to-one comparisons there, and some overall thoughts at the end. And it's about time to start thinking a little bit more about the draft. Of course, we'll always have an eye on free agency as moves could happen at any time. But we're getting into draft season, James. We're very close.
Let's go. I would yell louder. Also, if you missed the FanDuel read. Dan Hurley, good luck, man. Hopefully you crush it. I've never been a UConn fan in my life. I hated UConn growing up.
Yeah.
Hated them going up against the Bearcats in the Big
Oh,
East.
yeah.
Hated it. But Dan Hurley's a Bengals fan, so why would we not root for him?
And UC isn't dancing. Neither is Xavier. Can root for UC in the
Northwestern
NIT.
is, you nerd.
Really? I actually didn't even know that. I'm
They're
very
not
out of the
season.
loop. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Thanks for listening. And until next time, Hoo day. Have a good one.